Welcome to the Ageless Warrior Lab. I'm BJJ Black Belt and Dirty Dozen member Dave Meyer, here to draw wisdom from Brazilian Jiujitsu and the martial arts and explore how it applies to your life, success in business, and your long-term health. So, have you ever spent months, even years, trying to improve something that only leaves you feeling like you're stuck at the same level or not getting the results you want? You show up, you put in the time, you put in the reps, you work hard. So why aren't you getting better at the pace that you want? And this could be true in sports, it could be true in business, or just something you want to get better at in life in general. Here's a scenario I've witnessed again and again on the mats. Some total beginners take an intro class, they all sign up, they all start training maybe twice a week. And 3 months down the road, the great athletes, of course, with the natural talents are the ones who are shining. But if you fast forward down the road to about a year, it's often someone else, maybe someone who struggled at first, who's risen to the top. So what is it that makes the difference in who gets better and how fast they get better? Over decades, I've observed that there are methods and mindsets and practices that can dramatically accelerate your growth, both in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and beyond. I've seen what separates people who dabble from people who dominate, and why some people are just good while others become unbelievably great. So today's wisdom from the lab is this: how to get better faster. And it comes down to 3 rules. Rule number 1 is practice makes permanent, not practice makes perfect. Repetition is not by itself the thing that's going to make you improve. Rule number 2 is no one accidentally reaches the top of Mount Everest. You're more likely to get where you want to be if you have set it as a clear goal. And rule number 3 is the truth will set you free. Feedback is your friend, so leave your ego at the door. So let's start with rule number 1. Practice makes permanent. This is something I first heard from my good friend and mentor, Professor John Will, who's the first Australian Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. And I think it's totally right. Repetition is not by itself improvement. I, for example, have been riding a bike since I was a young child. This doesn't mean I'm a great bike rider now that can do tricks on my bike or anything. It just means I learned something and have kept doing the same thing for many years. In fact, if what you're practicing is not being done correctly, you're just going to imprint on that, and that's what you're going to be making part of your permanent memory. And that's certainly not something you want to do. In the case of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, if you're drilling a particular technique, but you're not actually drilling it correctly, you're just going to be rehearsing doing something incorrectly. And that's certainly not helpful. So let's take for granted that you're practicing whatever you care about correctly. But even then, the amount of times you do something or the amount of years you've spent doing it doesn't guarantee you're actually going to get any better. We assume experience and repetition necessarily makes you better, but that's not guaranteed. Repetition can make you more efficient at what you're doing. So you can learn from your mistakes, you can build neural pathways and become smoother at what you do, but it's not necessarily making you better at it. For example, recently my wife and I purchased a shed that we wanted to assemble, and it had lots of walls and slats of sheet metal that needed to be screwed together, literally hundreds of screws. And it took us a while to get going and figure out which piece went where and which was the right screw and all the right stuff like that. But a couple hours in, once we had really gotten the hang of it, we had a system going where she would get the right piece in place and get the right screw there, and I would tighten it up. And we definitely got quicker and more efficient at it. But that doesn't mean the shed was any better. It doesn't mean that we put the slats together in the right order, in the right place, or that I screwed things tight enough to make it secure. It just meant that we got better at the rote thing that we were doing again and again. A side note is, if experience doesn't necessarily make you better at something, then should we not trust experts with experience? And of course, you should trust experts who are real experts, someone with a track record of success or who's been deeply studying a topic for a long time. For example, there are things that you are probably an expert at. Maybe you're a good lawyer, or you're a plumber, or whatever it is that you do at your job or in your life, you're probably very good at it. And you wouldn't want someone to say, well, experts don't exist, so they shouldn't listen to you. If you're good at what you do, then you do have a lot to say. You do have expertise. So expertise is real, but it doesn't simply come from repetition, is my point. There was a 1993 study in the journal Psychological Review called The Role of Deliberate Practice in the Acquisition of Expert Performance. And it's considered the seminal paper on this topic. And in this research, they focused on professional musicians and amateur pianists. And they were looking at what were the things that were happening that were making the people who got better actually better. And the thing that paper is famous for, and this has been well studied since then, is this concept of deliberate practice. So it's not just that you're doing something again and again, but you're very deliberate about what you're doing. You're doing it correctly, you're being disciplined at how you're doing it, you're intentionally doing it, and you're intentionally trying to get better. So first be sure, whatever it is you're trying to get better at, that you're practicing it right, and you're practicing it in the right way with an intent to improve. Then amplify that practice. And what do I mean by amplify? So consider this. If you're practicing the right thing, then in 1 year of practicing it, you'll get better. But how can you, so to speak, tighten all the screws on the shed to be sure you're getting the maximum out of that 1 year? So in the case of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you can translate these concepts into any endeavor, you could say, well, first of all, let's get in more practice sessions, right? So if someone is doing something 2 days a week, and suddenly they can switch to practicing it 4 days a week, then they have doubled how good they're going to get. So they can achieve in 1 year what it would have taken them 2 years to achieve. And then if each time they're engaged in a practice session, they maximize that time. So in the case of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, maybe you get to the mat early and you start practicing or drilling with someone before the class even starts. And then you keep training right up to the end of class, right until the instructor says you have to get off the mat. I have an ethic that I've had my entire Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu career, and that is first on, last off the mat. And that's exactly what I meant by it, that I will just keep training as long as there's someone there to train with, because I want to get the most out of each session, because when I step off the mat, that day is gone, never to come back again. And so now that you're getting in more practice sessions and you're maximizing your time in the practice session, can you get in more reps? Can you be more focused at what you are spending that time on? So now you're there for an hour and a half instead of an hour, but you're being more quick and you're being more focused and you're not getting distracted and you're not taking breaks. Now you're making literally every minute of that practice better and better for you. And you're giving more attention to the detail of getting each repetition and doing it right again and again. And then there's relevant homework. When you're not in your practice session, can you be doing things that'll make you be better? In the case of sports, exercising, getting in the gym, stretching, bringing a better body. In the case of, I don't know, playing guitar, can you be listening to music? Can you be watching things and bringing in learning that way, even if you're not actually practicing? So in this way, you're training smarter, which really means being more efficient with your limited time. And we all have limited time on this planet. But when you're doing extra days and you're getting a little more done each day and you're being more focused in each moment of your training, and you multiply that by years or even a lifetime, that's where you can achieve in 1 year what someone else might take 10 years to achieve. And you can achieve in 5 years what it would have taken someone 50 years to achieve. And that's a big part of what separates someone who gets good from someone who gets great. Now, rule number 2 is no one accidentally reaches the top of Everest, unless, of course, they crashed in a plane and died there. So you're much more likely to get to where you want to go if you have set a goal to get there. If you're practicing and repeating the right thing, which we just talked about, you will get better, but you'll get further if you're actively trying to reach a measurable goal. In other words, if you can define what better is, you can then hopefully find a way to measure it, and that will give you some objective feedback. When I was running adoptapet.com, we wanted to make our whole operation better. We were a nonprofit that ran a successful website, but we wanted to become essentially a tech company that happened to be nonprofit. And we wanted to bring in all the learnings of any good tech company. And we brought in a lot of people to assist us. And 2 of them were consultants with a company called Better, Faster, Further. Their names were Regan Bach and Louis Seelencourt, and they're fantastic. And one of the things they really brought to us that really helped was teaching us about the science of setting goals. They gave an analogy that I may have modified over time, but basically it's if you think of you're on a car ride and getting better at something, let's just say that's equivalent to heading north. So as long as you're heading north, you're getting better. It's not saying how fast you're moving or where you're trying to get to, but you're heading north, you're getting better. But if you really want to achieve something, then you want to say, well, wait a second. I don't just want to head north. For example, I live in California. Maybe I could say, I want to get to the Oregon border and I want to get there 48 hours from now. So as soon as I've set a tangible goal and a timeline by which I have to do it, which is very important, now suddenly we can have a serious discussion about, well, wait a second. Do I need a faster car? Will I need a bigger gas tank? How many stops will I need to make? Is a car even good enough? Do I need to be thinking about an airplane? Do I need to be getting someone to lend me the money to buy a ticket for the airplane? All of that discussion happens because we said specifically where I wanted to end up and by when I wanted to get there. Before I was moving north, but it didn't say anything about how fast I was moving north or where I was trying to head. And that's the power of setting a goal, having a specific goal. In the martial arts, some people view getting to black belt or getting to the next belt rank as the goal. I don't think that's actually ideal, using belts as goals in that way. Belts themselves are more a recognition of what you've achieved and the improvement that you've made, which you should be very proud of. But the actual goal should be getting better, right? What you said inside of yourself. So maybe that's, in the case of jiu-jitsu, lasting longer before being tapped out, or getting more sweeps or more throws or something in the course of a night. And I should qualify for those of you who do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'm not saying you have to be tapping fewer times in order to get better. Obviously, tapping is part of learning. What I am saying is that you could be measuring your success, that you're finding yourself in positions less frequently where you can actually be tapped out from. But for life, the question is, what are you trying to get better at? And maybe you want to earn more money or get better at your job or save more money or something like that. Those are very easy things to measure, right? Because in case of money, you can objectively measure it. You can set a time frame. For something like, playing guitar, maybe not as easy to measure if you're getting better. You might be having to ask friends to check in with you every once in a while or something like that. But if you have specific goals and deadlines to gauge success, that allows you to know, are you doing the right things? Because once you do that, you can measure, if I said I was going to be somewhere by this time in 2 days, by this time tomorrow, I can say, am I on track? And that's what essentially would be called KPIs, right? So if you're in a business milieu, you'll talk about key performance indicators. So in our car analogy, for example, that would be the odometer. So that's telling you how far you've gone. You would be the speedometer, telling you how fast you're going, how many miles per hour. So once you've got those gauges in place, now you can say, well, are we achieving what we want? So if I've said I want to be at the Oregon border 48 hours from now, the question is 24 hours from now, am I halfway there? And if I'm not, it's telling me it's time for a course correction. It's giving me that important feedback. Which brings me to rule number 3, which is the truth will set you free. Leave your ego at the door. You need feedback. Feedback is your friend, especially when you're trying to get better. Now, ignorance is bliss. It's stressful to have to deal with a problem or to be made aware of something that you just don't want to have to deal with, obviously. But there are 2 ways to be blissful. One is keep your ignorance, or the other is to just deal with the problem and ideally solve it. And I vote for number 2. Look the devil in the eye and meet him straight on. You can't wrestle him to the ground unless you've gotten a hold of him first. If you've got a problem, if you've got to deal with something, just face it straight on. Don't hide your head in the sand. Get feedback and use it to get better. I remember a long time ago when I lived in Los Angeles, I used to attend a yoga class that my brother turned me on to. And it was taught by this really interesting guy, yoga instructor named Frank White. He was older, in his late 70s at that time, and he had grown up in New York. He was a kind of foul-mouthed, and he used to smoke, and then he discovered yoga, and it really changed his life. He suddenly became super healthy and eventually became a yoga instructor. But he still kept that New York edge, which was a very odd combination with someone teaching yoga. But I really liked it, and he taught these incredibly hard classes. And I started bringing my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coaches, the Machado brothers, with me just to experience how difficult this was because we were so tough and we were so strong and muscular. And it was surprising to me how hard a yoga class could be. And I remember one time we were in class surrounded by, women in their tight yoga pants who were all very good yogis. And we were all in a deep, deep stance, holding it for a long time. And they seemed to be gliding through it effortlessly. And all of us jujitsu guys were sweating and shaking. And I just remember sweat dripping off my brow. And Frank walked past us and without looking at us directly, right when he was in front of us, said, sometimes yoga is not about how tough you think you are, but how tough you really are. And then he kept walking, and we all got the message, and because we thought we were so tough, but not at that. And so that was important feedback, being willing to see the truth. You need feedback. You need to see the truth to assess if you're on right track. Imagine trying to get good at free throws in basketball, where you have to close your eyes right after you let go of the ball, and you never get the feedback, either audio or visual, of whether you made the basket. You wouldn't be able to correct yourself and get better. There was a 2007 paper in the Review of Educational Research called The Power of Feedback. And it was a comprehensive literature review where the authors reviewed findings from a ton of studies related to feedback and focusing on its impact on learning and achievement. And clearly, what's in the literature is feedback is crucial to getting better. And in fact, timely feedback. So it can't be coming later. You need it in time to understand what it is it actually refers to. And we could talk more sometime about should there be negative feedback, positive feedback. There's different kinds of feedback, but what you need is feedback. I remember the first day I encountered Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and maybe I could talk more about this another time, but I'd heard about the Gracie brothers, and I'd heard that their same family, their cousins, the Machados, had a club right near me. And I finally took a break from teaching my jiu-jitsu class at that time to go and experience this new art that I'd heard was so good. And the person who was teaching at the time was a purple belt, a guy named John Will, who I previously mentioned. And I had never met him, and the Machado brothers weren't able to make it to class that night because of traffic and weather conditions. So he was teaching the class, and I remember being disappointed. I was this really good black belt, and here I wanted to experience this new style, and here's some intermediate student who's teaching a class. But I took off my black belt, put on a white belt out of respect, and I said, hey, listen, I'm an instructor, but I'll be here and I'll take your class. And he proceeded to teach a fantastic class. And afterwards, we trained, and he beat me repeatedly, tapped me out many times. And I was stunned. And I remember asking him, wow, if you're just a purple belt, how good are the black belts? And he said, well, you got to come back. And I did. And the next time I came, Higan Machado, who was at the time the best in the world, super nice, trained with me, and he literally started beating me grappling without using his hands, just with his legs. And it was astonishing to me. And I felt like a child, and I felt helpless. And it was eye-opening to me. And that was exactly the feedback that was really useful for me. And I could have said, as other people did at the time, oh, I could have tried harder, or, well, if I'd have been able to use my secret death move, or a strike, things would have been different, which wasn't true at all. I could have ignored that feedback and put my head in the sand, but I didn't. And that is how you get better, is by setting your ego aside and being able to get feedback on what you're doing and use that to get better and better and better. In competitive sports, it can be difficult to understand if you're getting better. Obviously, if you're running or you're doing something like that, you can know you're getting better because you can see your times are improving. But if all you're doing is competing against people, it could be that the people in your school or in your club who you compete with every day, they're also getting better. And that happens in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, of course. And maybe they're getting better than you because you're busy and you're a professional and you can't be training as often as they do. And in that sense, if everybody else is getting better, you might have the sense that you're getting worse. You feel like you're actually slipping. So when you're in that situation where everybody around you is also getting better, and the only way to know if you're getting better is by comparison, you have to be creative in how you can assess how you're getting better. And obviously one way would be, can you last longer before being tapped out? Or do you at least know more moves? Do you understand what's happening? Are you coming to understand why you're losing, even if you can't stop it? And then what ends up happening is new, inexperienced people continue to cycle into class, and they are what I call your training wheels. They're the people where you can discover, oh, I guess I really am getting better because now it's getting easier and easier to beat the new people, right? So generally in life, it's just important to have some way to see if you're getting better. And if there's no obvious objective measure, you can use something what I call the ladder, which is your goal, the thing you're trying to achieve is the thing you can't measure effectively. It's the top of a ladder. But maybe there's something one rung down that you're very confident, well, if I can achieve that, then I will be achieving the next thing up, even if I can't measure it. So this is a problem in the nonprofit space, right? If you're trying to do something big and audacious, like end world hunger, it can be impossible to know that the thing we're doing today is actually leading to ending world hunger because it's such a slow process, or maybe there won't be data until a year from now to see what the effect has even been. And then, of course, when you're dealing with a big problem like that, you wouldn't know that any benefits that have occurred in the thing you're trying to fix are actually attributable to your efforts because lots of people are working on it. So you go a step down the ladder and you might say, okay, well, just hunger in my community. Or, and maybe I can't measure that, but can I measure how many people we reach with food? And if we do that, we will know that we're actually moving towards alleviating the problem. Or for some reason, we can't measure that. Maybe it's how much food are we purchasing? So you get the idea. You take steps down the ladder until you hit something that you can actually measure and that you're confident will lead to the next step that would ultimately lead to the goal that it's harder to measure. In the business world, there's something called lean startup. Lean startup is a methodology. There was a book written by a guy named Eric Ries, who is a friend and was an advisor of adoptabet.com. And he talks about innovation accounting. So in the case of startups, normally a business will measure its progress based upon its profit. But if you have a new company or a new product, you don't have profit often for many years. So how can you know that you're doing something good if you're not getting that feedback of having profit? So one thing you can do is say, is the product getting better? Are we innovating? And if we're confident that the type of innovations we're doing are going to ultimately lead to profit, then we've taken a step down on the ladder, but we're using innovation accounting. And that's how we'll know we're achieving something good. And in fact, we did that at adoptabet.com with Eric's help. And adoptabet.com and myself and my right-hand woman, executive director at that time, Abby Moore, are actually mentioned in one of his books about lean startup as an example of a nonprofit using those principles. So the point here is you need feedback and you have to have some way of understanding, are you getting better? As an aside, and maybe we could talk about this another time, it's also helpful if you know what of the possibly many things you're doing is actually causing the benefit and what's not. So you may have heard of the Pareto principle, which is 80-20 rule, that 80% of the benefit might come from 20% of the effort. So if you're doing multiple things to get better, it's good to try to figure out, are some of these things more the reason I'm getting better than others? Because obviously you then want to lean into those. So anyway, to sum it up, if you're trying to get better, remember this checklist. Rule number 1, practice makes permanent. Okay, so repetition is not by itself improvement. You want to engage in deliberate practice to practice the right things in the right way and then amplify that practice. Rule number 2, no one accidentally reaches the top of Everest, right? If you want to achieve something great, state it as a goal. Try to pick something that is measurable and attach timelines to it. You will move much faster than just heading north in the car. And rule 3, the truth will set you free. Okay. Feedback is your friend. Leave your ego at the door and be willing to see the truth. Remember, you can't wrestle the devil, which in this case is your shortfalls, to the ground unless you've got a hold of him first. So, this podcast itself will, I hope, get better over time, but only if I do the right things that we've just been discussing. And part of that is I need feedback, and that needs to come from you to help make this better. So please leave comments wherever you are listening, and I promise you I will read them and I can take it. And if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe, comment, like, and share. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcasts, a review would really help us spread the message. I will be back next week with more lessons from the lab. And in the meantime, keep developing your strengths and your wisdom and go out and do good in the world.